The rain lashed against the windshield like 1,000 sharp needles, stinging the glass with relentless force. Jade Kim's van skidded down the slick streets of Seoul's industrial district, the night as dark as the weight on her heart. She had been on the road since dusk, delivering food, making barely enough to scrape by. Medical school? A distant dream. The nursing path? Gone, after debts piled up and her hopes vanished into the void. Tonight, just like every night, she drove to survive. Hey, before we continue this thrilling journey, make sure you're subscribed to the channel, hit that like button, and drop a comment below to let us know where you're watching from. It's time for another intense story, so get comfortable, dim the lights, and let's get into it. Her phone buzzed with a notification, a ping from her delivery app. You have arrived. The delivery address was to a remote warehouse, the kind of location no one ever chose to work in. The tip, though? $30. Jade's stomach tightened at the thought of that extra cash. Enough to cover her bills and maybe, just maybe, buy something other than instant noodles for the week. She couldn't remember the last time she'd eaten something fresh. The dashboard clock blinked, 11:34 p.m. She pulled the van to the rear entrance of the warehouse, its looming figure barely visible in the dark. No lights, no security, nothing. This wasn't the usual type of delivery location. It felt wrong. A chill settled in the pit of her stomach. But there was the tip. There was always a reason to keep going, even when every fiber of her being screamed to stop. As Jade stepped out into the rain, her sneakers soaked through in seconds, her hood pulled tight to shield herself from the unforgiving downpour. The cold hit her like a punch to the gut, but it didn't matter. Her only focus was the promise of that tip, the hope of something better. She walked toward the warehouse entrance, each step heavy, as if the weight of the world was pressing down on her. As she neared, she froze. The sound of babies crying. No, not just one. Two. A frantic, desperate wail echoed from within, slicing through the night. It was the kind of cry that makes your heart stop, the kind that cuts through your bones and demands action. Without thinking, Jade rushed toward the source of the noise. There, under the harsh flicker of a broken street lamp, she saw them. Two infant car seats, side by side, placed on the rain-soaked concrete. The babies, barely a few months old, screamed in terror, their tiny faces twisted in pain and confusion. Jade's heart hammered against her chest, but what caught her attention wasn't just the babies. It was the man beside them. A man, slumped against the cold brick wall, his body soaked in blood. He was clutching one of the car seats as though his life depended on it, his other hand weakly gripping a gun, aimed directly at her chest. He was barely conscious, his breath coming in short, ragged gasps. If you're hooked so far, don't forget to subscribe and share this with someone who loves a good suspenseful story. Trust me, you won't want to miss what's coming next. Now, let's keep going. Jade stopped dead in her tracks, every part of her screaming at her to run. But she didn't. She couldn't. Something deep inside her knew that the choice she was about to make would change everything. She slowly approached the man, her heart thundering in her chest. His blood mixed with the rainwater, a dark pool spreading beneath him. His suit, once expensive, was now ruined, stained with the crimson evidence of a brutal injury. Ink-black tattoos snaked up his neck, dark and intricate like some ancient code. "Sir, are you?" Jade's voice trembled, her breath catching as she crouched beside him. Her hands shook as she reached for him, her medical training kicking in even though every instinct told her to get out. "Sir, can you hear me?" His eyes fluttered open, black as the night, filled with a pain that ran deeper than any injury she could see. But it was the fear in his gaze that caught her breath. Not fear for himself, but for the two babies still crying, helpless and abandoned. "Leave." His voice was barely a whisper, thick with an accent she couldn't place. Korean, maybe. "Leave or die." The gun wavered in his hand, pointed directly at her chest. Jade's training kicked in, overriding the rising panic. She could feel his pulse, the weak thrum under her fingers, and the coldness of his skin. The blood soaked through his ruined shirt, but it was his breath that made her stomach drop. Too shallow. Too weak. "I need to call an ambulance," she said, her words automatic. She moved to grab her phone. No, his voice was sharper now, desperation bleeding through his words. "No police. No hospital. They will find the children." Jade froze, her phone still clutched in her hand. The fear in his eyes sent a shiver down her spine. Who was he running from? Why was he so terrified of the hospital? She looked at the twins, still crying, their faces contorted with distress. Jade felt her resolve harden. She had seen too many people fall through the cracks, too many ignored by a broken system. These babies needed help. This man needed help. "I'll help you," Jade said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her heart. "But we need to move. Can you stand?" He nodded, weakly, his body trembling as he struggled to lift himself. Jade could see the pain radiating off him, the way he winced with every movement. He was tall, built solidly under the soaked fabric of his ruined suit, but every inch of him was broken. "On 3, Jade said. 1, 2, 3. With a strained grunt, they rose together. His weight nearly buckled her knees, but she kept her grip firm. Every step was agony, but they moved slowly toward the van. Jade's mind raced, her only thought was getting them to safety, whatever that meant. They reached the van in what felt like an eternity. Jade helped him into the passenger seat, her hands trembling with the weight of the moment. His breath was shallow, his skin unnaturally cold. The babies, still in their car seats, seemed to quiet down a little as Jade secured them in the back. They were exhausted, their cries turning into soft whimpers. Jade slammed the door shut, her hands shaking as she started the engine. The van sputtered, coughing twice before the engine roared to life. She hit the gas, the tires skidding on the wet pavement as they sped away from the warehouse, leaving the scene behind. For the first time that night, Jade let herself breathe. But as she glanced over at the man beside her, his eyes closed, his body tense with pain, she knew there was no going back. Whatever had just happened, whatever was unfolding, it was bigger than anything she could handle alone. And yet, here she was, connected to him by fate. Her hands gripped the wheel as the rain continued to hammer against the van, a relentless reminder of the storm that had just begun. If you've been loving the suspense and thrill so far, make sure you hit that subscribe button. Drop a like if you're hooked on this ride. Your support helps us bring more stories like this to others who need to hear them. Let's keep this journey going together. Jade couldn't focus on anything but the sound of the babies' cries. They were still in her van, secured in their car seats, but their distress twisted something inside her. The constant wail of two helpless infants felt like it was driving her mad, filling the empty spaces of the van with an unbearable weight. She had to act fast. They had to get out of here. She glanced over at Miho, his eyes half-lidded, blood smeared across his face. He'd passed out, leaning against the side of the passenger seat, his breathing ragged. It wasn't just his life on the line anymore, it was these babies too. Jade felt a wave of anger flood her chest. What kind of world had they been born into, where babies were caught in a web of violence and crime? Her jaw clenched as she slammed her foot harder onto the accelerator, the van speeding through the slick streets of Seoul. She could feel the weight of his gaze on her, even though his eyes were closed. She didn't know what was worse. The fear in his eyes before he passed out or the uncertainty of knowing just how bad things were about to get. I know you're feeling the tension right now, trust me, I'm feeling it too. Let's keep this journey alive. Like this video to help it reach others who need to hear this intense story. Your engagement keeps these moments alive. Now, back to Jade's struggle. Jade's mind raced as the night closed in around them. She didn't know what to do next. No plan, no backup. Just a sickening sense that she'd made a choice she couldn't take back. The road ahead seemed endless, and every street she turned onto felt like another dead end. Finally, her eyes locked onto a small, dimly lit motel sign. Starlight Motel, it read, flickering weakly. It wasn't much, hell, it wasn't anything, but it was a place to pause, to breathe, to think. She could feel Miho's body leaning against her in the passenger seat, the faint scent of blood and cologne still lingering in the air. They needed supplies. He needed medical attention. And the babies. The babies needed safety. She pulled the van into a dark corner of the parking lot. The lights were faint, casting shadows over the cracked concrete and rusting cars. Jade's heart thudded in her chest as she cut the engine. The silence of the night pressed in on her, suffocating and heavy. She glanced at Miho again, his body trembling slightly. He was barely holding it together. But even in his state, something about him felt dangerous, calculated. She couldn't help but wonder what kind of man he had been before everything fell apart. And what kind of man he still was, despite all the blood and brokenness. Jade's hand shook as she reached for the door handle. She needed to get out of this van and find a way to make everything right. But she knew she couldn't do it alone. You're part of this journey, and every bit of support you give helps bring this story to others. Make sure to share this video if you want to keep the momentum going. Let's spread the word and keep it real, because Jade and Miho's story isn't over yet. Jade opened the door and stepped into the cold night air. The sound of her feet hitting the pavement echoed in the empty parking lot. She felt a strange mix of fear and determination, like she was on the edge of something huge, something life-changing. But the fear never left. And the babies still cried, the sound sharp and jagged, breaking her thoughts into fragments. Miho stirred in the passenger seat, his voice weak but steady. I need to know, the babies. Do they have formula? Jade turned back, her heart racing as she looked at him. His eyes were open now, struggling to focus, his body still slumped in exhaustion. The desperation in his voice cut through her like a knife. I'll figure something out, Jade said, more to herself than to him. But the truth was, she didn't know how she was going to do it. She moved quickly, her mind scrambling. She needed to act fast, get the babies what they needed, and figure out a way to keep them safe. Jade didn't have the luxury of time anymore. The seconds seemed to stretch out before her, every movement feeling like it could be the one that decided whether they made it through the night. As she walked toward the motel's small office, she realized how much she was holding back. How much she was trying to ignore. What had led to this moment? Why was she risking everything for these babies and this stranger who, by all accounts, should have been left to die? But Jade didn't believe in abandoning people, not anymore. She had made her choice. And now, there was no turning back. The soft hum of the neon lights above her seemed to echo the ticking of an internal clock, counting down the moments until something would break. If you're still with us, I'm so glad you're sticking around. Every like, comment, and share helps bring this story to more people, and together, we can keep this journey going. If you're enjoying the twists and turns, hit that subscribe button. Now, let's get back to Jade and Miho's journey. By the time Jade reached the small motel office, the tension in her chest had only tightened. She opened the door, the bell above it ringing softly as she stepped inside. The dimly lit interior felt like a lifeline, a momentary escape from the storm, both outside and within her. Her heart was still pounding from the rush of adrenaline, and her thoughts kept racing between the babies and the wounded man she had barely gotten to know. The office clerk, an older man with a disinterested expression, glanced up at her, then back down at the book in front of him. Jade could tell he was used to late-night visitors, but tonight something about the look on her face made him hesitate. He didn't ask questions. Just handed her a key without a word. I know it's getting intense. Trust me, I'm feeling it too. But we need your support to keep this story reaching more people. Hit that like button if you're hooked on these characters, and share it with someone who might be intrigued by this journey. Now, let's keep going. Jade didn't waste time. She took the key, thanked the clerk with a forced smile, and moved quickly back out into the night. The rain hadn't let up. If anything, it was worse. The cold, relentless downpour seemed to mock her every step. She could feel the weight of the car seats in her hands, each step a reminder of the responsibility that had fallen on her shoulders. When she got back to the van, Miho was barely awake, his face pale and slick with sweat. The babies, Hannah and June, had quieted down, but their little eyes still glistened with tears, their exhaustion evident. Jade moved quickly, getting the babies inside first, careful not to jostle them too much. The discomfort in her own body was secondary. They needed to be taken care of. She looked at Miho again, his eyes fluttering open just enough to meet her gaze. A mix of exhaustion and gratitude passed between them, though neither said anything. Jane moved to help him, but his weak voice stopped her. "I'll manage," he whispered hoarsely, his accent still thick, though now strained. It wasn't much, but it was enough. Jade could tell that, even in his weakened state, he was trying to hold on to his sense of control. And somehow, despite everything, it made her trust him just a little more. There was something in his eyes, a flicker of humanity, that she hadn't expected. She hesitated, then spoke quietly. "I'm not leaving you out here." Miho didn't argue. "I know we're all in this together, and if you're still here, it means you care about the outcome as much as we do. Please, share this with someone who needs to see it. Like this video if you're on the edge of your seat right now, because we're about to dig deeper into what comes next for Jade and Miho." Inside the motel room, Jade couldn't help but feel the weight of the moment. The small space was cramped, barely big enough for the three of them, but it was enough for now. She set the babies down on the bed and glanced at Miho, who had finally managed to sit up against the wall. His shirt was still stained with blood, and Jade could see the pain etched into his face, even as he tried to remain composed. He was clearly fighting to stay awake, to push through the weakness and fatigue, but Jade knew it wouldn't last much longer. The silence between them was thick, suffocating almost. It wasn't comfortable, not yet. But Jade could feel a change in the air, a shift. There was something unspoken between them, a bond being forged in the fire of their shared survival. Jade broke the silence, her voice soft but steady. "You're not alone in this, you know." Miho's dark eyes met hers, and for a moment, she saw something in them, a glimpse of vulnerability that had been hidden behind the tough exterior. "I don't expect anyone to help me," he said, his voice a low rasp. "But you've already done more than anyone else would." Jade's chest tightened at his words. She didn't know what made her do it. Perhaps it was the exhaustion, the weight of everything pressing down on her, but she found herself sitting beside him. It wasn't out of pity, not at all. It was because, for the first time in a long while, she didn't feel so alone. "You've made it this far with Jade and Miho, and we can't thank you enough for your support. Please, keep the momentum going. Like this video, share it with friends, and leave a comment with your thoughts. Together, we're telling a story that might just change everything. Stick with us, because things are about to get even more intense." Jade looked at the babies once more. Hannah had fallen asleep, her tiny chest rising and falling with soft, rhythmic breaths. June, though, was still awake, his big, dark eyes staring at her as if he understood everything that was going on around him. It was surreal. These two innocent lives were now intertwined with hers, and no matter what came next, there was no going back. Miho's voice broke through her thoughts. "They're safe now," he said, his voice quiet but filled with resolve. "That's all that matters." Jade nodded, though she wasn't entirely sure about that. What mattered now was surviving. And for the first time since she'd found Miho in that alley, she wasn't sure if she was ready for what was to come next. But one thing was clear. The bond between them, however complicated, was only just beginning. The sound of the motel door clicking shut behind her was drowned out by the relentless rain. Jade could feel her heart pounding in her chest as she stood on the wet pavement, staring at the dimly lit parking lot. The weight of the car seats, now silent, was a constant reminder that there was no turning back. Inside the small motel room, Miho sat against the wall, his face pale, sweat still dripping down his forehead. The blood on his shirt had dried, but the wound in his side was deep, and Jade knew it was only a matter of time before he lost consciousness again. She had to keep him awake, keep him alive long enough for them to figure out their next move. Her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of her phone buzzing in her pocket. A number she didn't recognize flashed on the screen. She hesitated before answering, her stomach tightening. "Hello." A voice on the other end was low, distorted by static, but unmistakable. "You've got something that belongs to us." Jade's blood ran cold. "Who is this?" The voice chuckled darkly. "I think you know exactly who this is. Bring the babies to us, and maybe we'll let you both live. Don't, and there's no telling what might happen." Before she could respond, the call ended. Jade stood frozen, the phone still pressed to her ear, the words of the caller echoing in her mind. She didn't need to be told who they were. Miho's past was catching up to him, and now it was coming for the babies too. Her heart raced. She had made the choice to help, to keep the babies safe. But now it was clear there were forces at play far bigger than she could handle on her own. She glanced back toward the room, where Miho was barely holding himself together. The man was a liability, his enemies closing in, and yet he had a kind of presence. The way his eyes had softened when he looked at the babies, it wasn't what she expected. But it didn't change the fact that he had enemies who wouldn't hesitate to do whatever it took to get what they wanted. The situation was spiraling fast. The silence between her and Miho seemed to stretch for miles, neither of them knowing what to say. Finally, he spoke, his voice hoarse but steady. "They'll come for you too," he warned, his eyes locking with hers. "The babies are just the beginning. I won't let them take them," Jade replied, her voice sharp with determination. She turned away from Miho and started pacing, her mind racing through their options. "Then what are you going to do?" Miho's voice was low, but there was a strange sort of respect in his tone. "You can't take on my enemies. They'll burn everything down to get to those kids. You're not ready for this kind of fight." Jade's hands clenched into fists. She had no choice. There was no way she was walking away now. If you're feeling the intensity of Jade's situation, hit that like button to show your support. Share this video with your friends, because Jade's journey is just beginning, and it's only going to get more dangerous from here. Let's keep the momentum going. Jade knew he was right. She wasn't prepared for the kind of war that was about to unfold, but there was no turning back now. The lives of the babies were in her hands. The man sitting behind her, bleeding out and barely conscious, was part of the equation too. She glanced out the window, her eyes catching the reflection of the motel sign, the neon flickering like the unstable hope she was clinging to. There had to be a way out, a way to protect these kids and herself from whatever storm was headed their way. Her phone buzzed again. This time, the caller ID read unknown. She didn't hesitate this time. She answered quickly. "What do you want from me?" "You're not listening, are you?" The voice on the other end was even colder this time, laced with anger. "You have two choices. Bring the babies to us and you'll walk away. Or we come to you and it won't be so easy." Jade's grip tightened around her phone. "You won't get them. Not without a fight." The voice chuckled. "That's what I wanted to hear. It's all coming down to this moment. If you're with Jade, if you're ready for the fight that's coming, make sure you like and share this video. Let's show everyone that Jade's story deserves to be heard. We're just getting started, and trust me, you don't want to miss what comes next." Jade's breath caught as she hung up the phone. She stood there, her fingers still trembling as she stared at the screen, feeling the weight of what she had just committed to. Her instincts were telling her to run, to disappear before it was too late. But she couldn't do that. Not when there was so much at stake. Turning toward the babies, she took one last look at the room she'd set up for them. There wasn't much to offer in terms of safety, but it was all she could give them for now. Turning back to Miho, she made a decision. "We're leaving tonight," she said, her voice calm but resolute. "And we're not going alone." Miho didn't respond immediately, but his gaze softened, almost imperceptibly. "You're making a dangerous choice, Jade," he said quietly. "But I think I've always known that about you." Jade met his eyes, holding his gaze. "We're in this together now. I'm not walking away." Jade's hand trembled as she closed the motel door behind her, the weight of the night pressing in. She hadn't expected it to feel this heavy, the responsibility of keeping Miho and the babies safe weighing on her with every breath she took. The threats were escalating, and the stakes were higher than ever. She walked back toward the bed where the babies slept soundly, their tiny bodies curled in the car seats, their faces still and peaceful despite the chaos unfolding around them. The world was a dangerous place for them, just as it had been for Jade, once. But there was no turning back now. Miho shifted on the floor, the weak sound of his groaning making her pause. She turned to look at him. His face was pale, his breathing shallow, but he was awake, barely. "You okay?" she asked, her voice soft, trying not to break the fragile silence. Miho's eyes opened, heavy and tired. I'm not sure how much longer I can keep this up. Jade's chest tightened at his words. She didn't want to hear it, but it was the truth. They were running out of time. Running out of options. We don't have a choice, Jade replied firmly, though she wasn't entirely sure if she was convincing him or herself. We're getting out of here. I'm not letting them get the babies. Miho's gaze softened, and for the briefest moment, she saw a flicker of the man he might have been before everything fell apart. He nodded slowly, the tiniest hint of trust shining in his dark eyes. It wasn't much, but it was enough. The night felt like it was swallowing them whole. Jade had no idea what time it was, everything blurred in the haze of fear and adrenaline. The longer she stayed in this motel room, the more she felt the walls closing in. But the babies needed her. Miho was counting on her. She had no choice but to keep moving. She checked her phone once again, her pulse racing as she reread the threatening message from earlier. The caller's words echoed in her mind. Bring the babies to us. She didn't know who they were. She didn't know what they wanted. But she did know one thing. They were coming for them. Jade felt a fire igniting in her chest. There was no way in hell she was going to hand over 2 innocent children to people who saw them as nothing more than tools to manipulate. But she couldn't do this alone. She needed a plan. She turned back to Miho, who was struggling to sit up, his body fighting against exhaustion and pain. She approached him, kneeling down in front of him. The moment their eyes locked, she could feel the gravity of their situation, felt it in the way her hands shook as they rested on his. We need to leave. Now, she said, her voice steady but intense. I'm going to get you to a hospital, Miho. They can help you. Miho's lips parted, but his voice was barely a whisper. They'll find us at the hospital. It's not safe there. Jade hesitated, the weight of his words sinking in. He was right. They couldn't risk going to the authorities. Not when they had no idea who was hunting them. Then we go somewhere they can't reach us, she said, determination in her eyes. Somewhere we can disappear. Miho didn't respond, but his eyes held hers, and Jade could see the trust building between them. It wasn't much, but it was enough to keep them both moving forward. The tension's only growing, and your support is keeping the momentum alive. If you're still with us, hit that like button and share this video with someone who needs to hear this intense journey. We're getting closer to the moment where everything changes. Don't miss what happens next. Stay with us. Jade didn't wait. She stood and grabbed the car keys, her heart pounding in her chest. Miho was still weak, but the fire in his eyes told her he wasn't going to let her do this alone. He was fighting for something, maybe for the babies, maybe for himself, but the fight was on, and they were both in it now. The rain had slowed a little, but the night was still thick with uncertainty. Jade stepped out into the parking lot, looking over her shoulder toward the motel room. The door was closed, but she knew it wasn't just the motel they were running from. It was everything. The threat. The unknown enemy. The past that Miho was running from, and the future that the babies needed to have. She climbed into the driver's seat, taking one last breath before she started the engine. The van rumbled to life, its headlights cutting through the wet streets. She wasn't sure where she was going, but one thing was certain, it wasn't here. They had to move. And they had to keep moving no matter what. The world outside was dark and cold, but inside the van, there was something else, a bond forming, a fragile thread of trust. Jade wasn't just running from danger. She was running for them. Running to protect the future that was in her hands. And she wasn't going to stop until she'd seen it through. Hey, if you're still following Jade and Miho's journey, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe if you haven't already. Your support makes all the difference in getting this story out there. The tension is only getting thicker. Let's keep it going and see where this path leads. The motel room felt too small, too suffocating. Jade's breath was heavy, the weight of the night pressing down on her as she paced back and forth. The rain had slowed, but the silence inside the room was deafening. Miho sat on the bed, his exhaustion apparent, but his eyes were still sharp. He watched Jade move, his gaze lingering on her, trying to read her, as if she was the only thing keeping him grounded. She didn't know where to go from here. The threat on the phone replayed in her mind, over and over again. They were coming for the babies, and if they were after them, they'd stop at nothing. But Jade wasn't just going to hand them over. She couldn't. She wouldn't. "Miho," she said quietly, her voice steady but tinged with an edge of desperation, "I don't know how much longer we can hide. They're going to find us." Miho's face was unreadable. "You're right," he said after a long pause, his voice hoarse, "but there's one thing I didn't tell you. There's someone on the inside. Someone who knows where we are." Jade stopped in her tracks, her eyes narrowing. "What do you mean, someone on the inside?" Miho didn't answer immediately, his eyes flickering briefly to the window, his mind clearly racing. "You'll find out soon enough," he finally said, his tone grim. "But you won't like it." Jade's stomach twisted in knots. Who could Miho be talking about? Who on the inside was working against them? The thought of betrayal, the very thing she feared most, felt like a punch to the gut. She took a deep breath and turned toward Miho, her voice firm. "If there's someone working against us, we need to know who they are. Now." Miho's eyes met hers, a flicker of something dark in his gaze. "It's someone you know. Someone you trust." He paused, letting the words hang in the air, the weight of them sinking in. Jade's heart dropped as she tried to make sense of what he was saying. Her mind raced through the few people she could trust, the few people who knew where she was. And then it hit her. Her brother. The realization was like a slap across the face. Her own flesh and blood, the one person who knew her better than anyone, was the one working against her. "I knew it," Jade whispered, her voice barely audible. "I knew there was something off. He's been acting strange lately." Miho nodded slowly. "He's part of the syndicate. He's been keeping tabs on you." Jade's breath caught in her throat. Her brother, the one person she thought she could count on, had been playing both sides. She could feel the sting of betrayal deep in her chest. It wasn't just the babies that were in danger, it was her, too. Her whole life was built on a foundation of lies. She turned away, trying to steady herself. "What do we do now?" Miho didn't respond immediately. His face was unreadable, his thoughts clearly miles away. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and urgent. "We fight. We have no other choice." Jade and Miho's journey is about to take a huge turn, and you don't want to miss what's coming next. If you're invested in this story, give this video a thumbs up and share it with someone who needs to be part of this ride. We're pushing forward, and your support means the world to us. Stick around, we're just getting started. Jade felt the cold weight of the truth settle over her like a dark cloud. She wasn't just fighting to protect the babies anymore. She was fighting for her own life, and the life of the one person who had been by her side all this time, her brother. But no matter the cost, no matter the pain, she wouldn't back down. She had a responsibility to these babies, to Miho, and to herself. She couldn't afford to let the past dictate her future. Jade took a long, steadying breath. "All right," she said, her voice stronger now, a fire rekindled in her eyes. "Let's get ready. We leave at dawn." Miho's eyes locked onto hers, a flicker of respect in his gaze. He didn't speak, but there was a silent understanding between them now. They were in this together, for better or worse. And there was no turning back. Absolutely. Here's the 7th batch of the video script, with natural emotional CTAs that encourage the viewers to support the story, while maintaining the pacing, tone, and emotional depth from your original script. Let's continue the journey. We're about to dive into a new chapter, and I'm so glad you're still here with us. If you're loving the twists and turns of Jade and Miho's journey, hit that like button and share this with someone who needs to be on this ride with us. Your support means everything, and it helps this story reach even more people. Let's jump right in. The night was quiet now, save for the soft hum of the rain as it tapped against the windows. Jade sat at the small table, her eyes staring blankly at the map spread out before her. The room was dimly lit, the only light coming from the small bedside lamp beside her. Her mind raced through the possibilities, the plans, the dangers that were closing in on them. Miho was asleep, his breathing slow and steady, though the faint tremor in his chest never seemed to go away. She knew he wasn't just physically drained, he was exhausted in ways she couldn't even understand. But she couldn't afford to let her guard down. Not now. The sound of the babies shifting in their car seats brought her back to the moment. Hannah and June were both asleep, their tiny bodies curled up in the blankets she'd brought them, but their faces still held traces of the distress from earlier. Jade exhaled deeply and closed her eyes for a moment, trying to steady herself. The weight of what they were about to do hung heavily on her. She couldn't afford to make a mistake. I can feel the tension building, can you? If you're invested in this journey, show us some love by liking this video. Your support helps us bring more of this story to the people who need it most. Keep sharing, keep commenting, let's keep Jade and Miho's story alive and get them through this. The plan was simple, in theory. Get out of the motel, get to a safe house, and lay low until they figured out their next move. But simple plans rarely worked out when enemies were hunting you. And Jade knew she couldn't trust anyone. Not anymore. She looked over at Miho, who had shifted in his sleep. His face looked peaceful for the first time in hours, but Jade knew better than to let appearances fool her. His past was coming for him, and by extension, it was coming for her too. Her heart clenched at the thought. She couldn't do this alone. She had already made that mistake once. Jade's phone buzzed on the table in front of her, and she froze. For a moment, she didn't want to check it. But she knew she had to. With a deep breath, she reached for the phone. A new message from an unknown number. It read, "You're out of time. Come to the old docks alone. We'll be waiting." Her stomach sank, and her heart started racing. The docks? That was the last place she wanted to go, especially now. She glanced at Miho again, then at the babies, both of whom were still asleep. Could she trust him enough to follow through with her own plan? Could she do this without him? Jade shook her head. There was no time for doubt. She stood up, the weight of the decision pressing down on her chest. No more waiting. She had to move now. Jade grabbed her jacket and walked toward the door, taking one last look around the motel room. This could be the last time she saw this place. She couldn't afford to waste any more time. Her heart was beating in her chest, a loud, constant reminder that this was real. The danger was real. She opened the door quietly, trying not to wake Miho or the babies. The night air hit her like a slap to the face, sharp and cold. The rain had slowed, but the dampness still clung to everything. She couldn't think about that now. She had one goal, to get to the docks and find out who was behind this threat. Jade took one last deep breath and stepped into the night, her footsteps light and fast as she made her way toward the van. The wheels in her mind were already turning. She needed to move, to think, and to protect the babies. But she couldn't shake the feeling that something was waiting for her at the docks. Something that would change everything. We've made it to the final chapter of Jade and Miho's journey. If you've been with us through every twist and turn, don't forget to show your support by hitting that like button and sharing this video with someone who needs to be a part of this intense ride. Your support helps get this story to the right people, and we couldn't have done it without you. Let's finish this strong. Jade's footsteps echoed in the night as she moved swiftly through the wet streets. The phone in her pocket buzzed again, but she ignored it. She couldn't afford distractions, not now. The docks were just ahead, their ominous shadows looming in the distance. The rain had picked up again, turning the ground into a slippery, treacherous path. Every instinct told her to turn back, to find another way. But there was no turning back. The babies were depending on her. Miho, he was counting on her, even if he didn't fully trust her yet. She had to protect them all, no matter the cost. The message from the unknown number still lingered in her mind. Come alone. She didn't trust it for a second. But she also knew that this was the only way to end it, to face whatever threat lay ahead and take control of the situation. As she reached the docks, the darkness seemed to close in around her. The water lapped quietly against the pier, and the lights from nearby warehouses barely lit the way. She looked around, trying to spot any signs of movement. Her breath came out in quick bursts, her mind racing through every possible scenario. And then she saw them. Two figures standing at the end of the dock, silhouetted against the dim lights. One was tall, with a commanding presence. The other was smaller, more elusive. She couldn't make out their faces, but she didn't need to. She knew who they were. The Syndicate. This is it, the final confrontation. We're about to find out how this all ends, and I can't wait to take you there. If you're enjoying this, drop a like, leave a comment, and share the video with someone who needs to see it. Your support keeps this story alive. Let's see where Jade's journey takes us next. Jade's heart hammered in her chest, but she pushed forward, refusing to show any fear. The tall figure stepped forward, his voice low and menacing. "You came," he said, his tone amused, as if he'd been expecting her. "I'll give you credit for that. Not many people would show up for this." Jade didn't flinch. "Where are the babies?" she demanded, her voice steady, though her hands trembled slightly. "You said I would walk away if I came. Well, I'm here. Now let them go." The figure chuckled darkly, his eyes gleaming in the low light. "You're in over your head, Jade." This was never about the babies. This was about sending a message. The smaller figure stepped forward, revealing a familiar face. Jade's stomach dropped. Her brother. Everything has led up to this moment. If you've been with Jade and Miho through this roller coaster of emotions, hit that like button and share this video. Let's make sure Jade's story reaches more people and that they understand the struggle, the fight, and the choices that led to this moment. Let's see how this ends. Jade's breath caught in her throat as she locked eyes with her brother. He stood there, arms crossed, his gaze cold and distant. The betrayal stung more than she could put into words. She had trusted him. She had loved him. And now here he was, working against her, working with the very people she had spent her life trying to escape. "Why?" she whispered, her voice cracking with emotion. "Why are you doing this? You're my brother." He didn't answer at first, just stared at her with those emotionless eyes. But finally, he spoke, his voice low and cold. "I never wanted this life for you, Jade. But you left me with no choice. You were always going to be a liability. And the babies, they're the leverage I need." Jade's mind raced. The connection between her brother and the Syndicate was clear now, but it wasn't enough. She couldn't back down. "I don't need your help," she said, her voice trembling with emotion, but filled with fierce resolve. "I never did." The tall figure smirked, clearly enjoying the moment, but before he could say anything else, Jade did what she had to do. She lunged forward, grabbing the nearest object, a rusted pipe, swinging it with everything she had. It struck the tall figure across the chest, knocking him back, but he recovered quickly, drawing a gun from his waistband. Jade's heart raced as she backed away, her eyes flicking to her brother. He was still standing there, watching, his face unreadable. "You're making a mistake," he said, his voice quieter now, though there was no warmth in it. "You'll never win, Jade. This is bigger than you." Jade didn't have time to process his words. She had to act. With one last look at her brother, she turned and ran, her heart pounding in her chest. The sound of footsteps behind her grew louder. She knew they were following, but she didn't look back. The babies. She had to get back to the van. She had to get them to safety. The rain started to pour harder again, blurring her vision, but she kept running, faster now, as the sound of pursuit grew closer. She wasn't going to stop. Not now. Not when there was still a chance. Jade reached the van, and with a quick glance over her shoulder, she slammed the door shut, locking it behind her. She looked at Miho, who was awake now, his eyes wide with urgency. "Go," she said, her voice steady despite the chaos unfolding around her. "We're getting out of here."